Welcome to General Physics 1. So in this video, we're going to continue our discussion about the forces acting on a pulley. So here we're going to try to see how advantageous it is to use a pulley system, especially when lifting heavy objects. So we have here a problem that would help us understand the concept. So to lift a log of 250 kilograms, the campers devise a pulley system as shown below. So find the force required to lift the log using the pulley system. So before we answer this problem, let us try to solve for the force required in order to lift the same object without the use of a pulley. So if we are going to lift this manually, so ano yung force required to lift this object? So suppose we have the object here, which is rested on a plane. So it has a mass of 250 kilograms. So this object is acted upon by the force due to gravity, which is equal to its weight. And what we want to know is the force required to lift this object. So we want to know the force required to lift this object. So let's call this force of lift. So since this is initially at rest, so we assume that the summation of forces along y is equal to 0. So to get the value of to solve for our net force along the y-axis, we get the sum of the forces acting along the y. So we have here force lift, which is directed upwards, and our weight, which is directed downward. So since they are directed opposite to each other, so let's assign the upward force to be positive and the downward force to be negative. So therefore, to get the value of to solve for the summation of forces along y-axis, or the net force along the y-axis, we have force of lift plus negative force due to gravity, or simply minus force due to gravity, is equal to the summation of forces along the y-axis. So let's now substitute this term with this equation. So that we have force of lift is a minus force due to gravity is equal to 0. So to solve for the force of lift, we just transpose this one to the other side of the equation. So force of lift is equal to force of gravity, wherein we know that this is to get the force due to gravity, we multiply the mass times the acceleration due to gravity. So to solve for the force of lift, let us now substitute this equation with the given. So the mass of the object is 250 kilograms times the acceleration due to gravity is 9.8 meter per second squared. So the force required to lift a 250 kilogram object is equal to 2,450 Newton. So this is the force required for the campers to manually lift this object. So without the use of a pulley, they need to apply a force equal to 2,450 Newton. So how about if we now apply the use of pulley system? So will this affect the amount of force required to lift the same object with the mass of 250 kilograms? So let us now try to answer our problem. So tignan nyo, so tandaan nyo tong force required without the use of this simple machine, itong pulley. So ang force required natin dito is 2,450 Newton. So anong effect nitong using pulley in lifting the same object? So in our pulley system, so we have two pulleys. So we have pulley system number 1 and pulley system number 2. So this string, so itong string na to, the same as this string and this one, is just one string running along our pulley. So ganitong itsura niya. If we remove the pulley, ganito ang itsura niya. that is a single string. So, itong isa dito, this is not part of this string na to. So, iba siya. Okay, so, ayan, kapag nilagay natin yung pulley, ganyan na yung itsura niya. Ayan, so ito yung pulley 2, ito yung pulley number 1. Okay, so what we want to look for is the force required. So, the force here that would lift our object. So, the pulling force, if we pull this string, so, ano yung value ng force na kailangan para ma-lift natin itong object na to? So, let's call this pulling force, force of lift. Yan. So, to answer this problem, first, we need to identify the forces acting on this system. So, we have here pulley system number 1. So, analyze muna natin yung forces that are acting sa pulley system number 1. And then, mamaya, let's analyze the forces acting on our pulley number 2. Ayan. So, here, by the way, so here class, so ito, since this is the same pulley, so therefore, the tension experienced by this pulley is the same. So, tension dito is the same as the tension here. And, yun. So, now, in order for us to solve for the force required, so the force of lift, we need to solve for the value of the tension force along the string. So, ano ba yung tension that is experienced by the string? So, to solve for this, so let us analyze our pulley number 1. So, for pulley number 1, we have here a mass of 250 kg that is initially at rest. So, this 250 kg. So, this mass is acted upon by the force due to gravity. So, the mass is connected to a pulley system. So, we have here string number 1 and this string number 2. So, these two strings supports the weight of the object. So, force due to gravity is equal to the weight. So, these two strings is preventing. So, if this is already being lifted, so these two strings is will prevent our weight to accelerate downwards, or prevent our object to accelerate downwards. So, this is supporting the weight of our object. So, this must be directed upwards. So, this string is the same string. So, naka-ano lang siya dyan. Nakakabit siya dito sa ating pulley number 1. So, since the same string lang naman siya, isang string, then the tension in this side must be the same to the tension in this side. Excuse me. So, assuming that the upward forces are positive and the downward forces are negative, let us now solve for the summation of forces along the y-axis and look for the equation that would solve for the tension force, because we need the value of the tension force to look for the value of the force required to lift the object. So, summation of forces along y. So, since this is initially at rest, so we assume that this is equal to 0. So, let's solve for let's look for the equation for our summation of forces along y. So, here, what are the forces acting along the y-axis? We have two tension forces, T1, and they are both positive. So, T1. So, wala siyang T1. So, T lang ang ilagay natin. Tension plus tension. Okay, so tension 1 plus tension 2, which is equal. And then, since we have here an opposing force, which is the force due to gravity or the weight, so, subtract tayo, plus negative. So, since negative naman, so subtract weight is equal to summation of forces along y. Excuse me. So, let's substitute this term with our equation. So, we have T plus T, tension plus tension minus the weight of an object is equal to 0. So, since pareho naman to, so gawin na natin tong 2t. So, we have 2t's minus 2 tensions minus the weight of an object is equal to 0. To solve for t, we need to isolate our tension force here on the one side, and kailangan mapunta sa kabilang side yung lahat ng hindi naman tension. So, to do that, transpose our W to the other side of the equation, so that we'll have 2 is equal to W. So, divide both sides by 2 to eliminate the 2. So, tension is equal to W over 2. So, we know that weight is equal to mass times the acceleration due to gravity. So, therefore, tension is equal to mg divided by 2. So, tension is 1/2 our weight. So, this will be our equation number 1. Okay, so, punta naman tayo dun sa ating pulley number 2. So, pulley system number 2. So, again, ito pulley number 2. This is pulley number 1. We have tension, and then here is the force required to lift the object. So, let us now analyze this system. Second pulley system. Excuse me. So, for pulley number 2, we have here a pulley, and then attached to the pulley is the string. So, here, this side of the string is experiencing a tension force, and this side, we need to look for the force required. So, the pulling force required to lift this object. So, force lift. So, ito, disregard din natin to kasi hindi naman siya kasama dun sa string natin. So, this is just supporting this massless pulley. Okay, so, ano yan? Ang tawag dun? So, this side of, if we apply a force to this side of the pulley, of the string, so what it does is, it will enable this side to accelerate upwards and this side to accelerate downwards. So ayan. So, we have here, since this is accelerating, okay, so, excuse me, so, yan. So, continue. So, if we apply a force here, so if we apply a force to this side, so we expect that this object or this system will be accelerating to this part. So, therefore, we consider this part to be positive, and yung force dito, the tension force, since they are at the opposite side of the pulley, so this tension force here is preventing or is opposing the motion or opposing the force applied to this direction. So, we have here an opposing force. So, therefore, itong tension force is an opposing force. So, sabihin na natin that that is our negative force. So, this is our positive force because this force will allow our object to accelerate towards this direction. And this is a force opposing our applied force. So, to get the force, summation of force acting along the y, so we get the sum of these two forces. So, we have force lift is equal to force required to lift the object, minus the tension force. So, from our equation number 1, we know that, ay, asan na yun? Nawala siya. Okay. Ayun. So, from our equation number 1, we know that the tension force is equal to mass times the gravity or the weight divided by 2, or 1/2 the weight of an object. So, therefore, so dito, since sabi natin that tension is equal to mass times the acceleration due to gravity divided by 2, we can substitute this term with this equation, so that we have summation of forces along the y-axis is equal to force required to lift the object minus mg divided by 2. So since this is equal to 0, we equate it to 0. So F of lift minus mg divided by 2 is equal to 0. To look for the value of the force required to lift the object, so we just simply transpose this to the other side of the equation, so that F, force required to lift the object, is equal to mg divided by 2. So substitute na natin to. So dito na lang. Ay, sorry. Okay, so dito na lang tayo. Hindi natin dito. So force required to lift an object is equal to yung mass natin, which is 250 kilograms. So this 250 kilograms times the acceleration due to gravity is 9.8 meter per second squared, and then divided by 2. So 250 times 9.8 is 2,450 newtons divided by 2. So now 250 divided by 2 is equal to 1,225 newtons. So here, so we have your pulley number 1, pulley number 2, tension, and we have here the force of lift. So i-rewrite ko lang yung natin, yung solution. Excuse me. Yung solution natin dito. Sabi natin that force required to lift the object is equal to mass times the acceleration due to gravity divided by 2. So if we substitute it with the given, we have 250 kilograms times 9.8 meter per second squared divided by 2. So we have 2,450 newtons divided by 2. So the force required to lift the object is equal to 1,225 newtons. So we need to apply, in order to lift this object, using this pulley system, the pulling force that we need is equal to 1,225 newton. So kanina sabi natin, if without using pulley, ang force required to lift the object is equal to 2,450 newton. But when we used a pulley system, so this simple machine, so the pulley system decreased the amount of force required to lift or to accelerate this 250 kilogram body. So therefore, the use of pulley is helpful or advantageous in decreasing the force, the amount of force required, or it is advantageous especially when we are lifting heavy objects, kasi nga binabawasan niya yung amount of force required. So if we increase the number of pulleys in our system, it will decrease the force required. So kung dadagdagan nyo pa yan ng another pulley, so mas maapektuhan niya pa yung system natin. So yan. So that's all for this video. So in our next video, we'll have another example about pulley. So tension forces and pulley systems. So goodbye and see you in our next video.